Could you walk us through the journey of self-improvement and tell me how you were able to change your addictive behavioral patterns?
Yeah, I think there's this idealized version of it where you stare into the mirror at 4 a.m. and you have this blinding realization that it's time to stop. And honestly, it never, ever works like that. It sounds good in the autobiog, doesn't it? But yeah, it never, ever works like that. So for me, to talk about sobriety, you've got to unpick about what do I really mean by that? So I stopped smoking, and that was the catalyst for me for the journey that kind of made the drinking more of an obvious problem. That kind of, it didn't just give me the platform to address the drinking, it actually highlighted a lot of the issues with the drinking. So I stopped smoking, then a couple of years later I stopped drinking, and stopping drinking highlighted a lot of issues with my diet. And after I'd stopped drinking, my wife and I had a daughter, and my wife got a bit unwell during the first year of our daughter's life. And that was pretty stressful. I was working and being a bit of a single father some of the time. And it was really hard work. And what I found was I was sitting late at night eating cookies the way I used to drink. And it was like, realization number 3. Probably ought to do something about that. So I sorted out my diet. That very much helped out. And so that, in many ways, removed all of the most obvious addictive behaviors that I was doing. Honestly, I had to go through a bit of a journey with my phone, with social media, with constantly checking my emails, all of that sort of stuff. I had to go on a bit of a journey about emotional intelligence. If you speak to my wife, I am absolutely confident she will tell you that I am still on that journey and I have not made it yet. Really, yeah, the last 10 years since I stopped drinking, the last 12, 13 years since I stopped smoking, there has been a lot of self-development going on, and there still is. I tend to think of the end of May as about the time when I got sober. I'm not even sure what the exact date was, but don't tell anybody, because I always just say it was the 7th of June, because the 7th of June just sounds nice. So yeah, you could argue that was the day I got sober, but honestly, it's been a process, and a long one, and one that's still going on.
What was the hardest one to quit then? Because you've just gone through cigarettes, alcohol, phone, cookies.
I think they all have their own unique kind of things. I work a lot with smokers, and a lot of smokers will tell you that stopping smoking is harder than getting off heroin, which I always find interesting, considering most of them have never got off heroin. So how would they know? But yeah, there's some difficulties with stopping smoking. I think it's probably the easiest because it just doesn't do anything for you. It is an absolute con. Whether you like the effects of being drunk or not, at least there are effects. So that was probably the easiest. Alcohol, I think, is difficult because our society is just so totally tuned into getting drunk. Whatever is going on, there is likely to be alcohol during it or after it, one way or another. So getting around how you can make your life work and how you can fit in with everything that's going on as somebody who doesn't drink, that I think poses a particular challenge. Food is even harder because you can't quit food, can you? You're never really there, are you? You're only as good as your last meal. So yeah, and again, we live in a society that is just full of food-like objects that promote obesity that aren't actually nutritious in any way, shape, or form. So it's very easy to get caught in that trap, and that can pose a lot of problems for getting out. Also, there's just a logistic problem. Not drinking is easy, just don't do it. Whereas to maintain a healthy diet, it literally takes work almost every day. I batch cook a lot, so I don't cook every day, but I have to remember to do my overnight oats, don't I? It is a constant and ongoing effort. Whereas you stop smoking, you just stop smoking.
Yeah. Do we have the kind of food hierarchy the wrong way around? Because for some reason, we have carbs at the top, but they tend to be empty carbs. And then we have fats, and then we have proteins, but shouldn't it be flipped on its head for a kind of healthy diet?
Okay, so you redeemed yourself by saying empty carbs, because I get very annoyed with people who just go, oh, carbs are bad. It's like, no, they're not. Vegetables are made of carbs. If you don't eat carbohydrates, you will get bowel cancer really quickly because fiber is a carbohydrate, isn't it? I am not a fan of refined sugar, but actually the sugar in fruit and vegetables, the naturally occurring sugar in fruit and vegetables, that's not bad for you at all. The longer chain carbohydrates that make up the most of the energy in fruit and vegetables, beans, pulses, that's really quite good for you. Also, whole grains. I eat an awful lot of whole grains. I think they're very good for you. So I am a huge fan of carbohydrates, just obviously not refined sugar, not white flour. I would say, I haven't measured it, but I would imagine my diet is probably about 80% carbohydrate, 10% protein, and 20% fat. Yeah, my maths is not strong. No, I do eat an awful lot of beans and pulses.
Are you vegetarian or do you eat meat?
Even worse than vegan, I'm whole food plant-based. So yeah, I don't eat anything other than beans, fruit and veg, and whole grains. And I don't eat processed food, which is to maintain that diet, you really do need to do quite a lot of cooking. You can't exactly nip out to McDonald's, can you?
Yeah, exactly. How has that changed the way you think and the way you feel on a day-to-day basis?
Okay, how it's changed the way I feel is very easy to answer. I feel absolutely fantastic. I feel better than I did in my 20s. I have more energy than I did in my 20s. And like diet plays a big part in that. Not drinking and smoking also does help. Has it changed the way I think? That's a really interesting question. So I got into eating this way because I think there's quite a compelling case around it being much better for your health. So I got into eating this way for totally selfish reasons. I don't want to present myself as a saint or anything, but actually there is a huge argument for eating plant-based and its impact on the environment. There's also quite an argument for how basically terrible the animal industry is. Meat and dairy generally does not work out very well for the livestock. You probably can find some grass-fed beef farmer who treats his cattle nicely, but the vast majority of animals that are killed or milked for food are treated pretty badly. And it opened my eyes to these things. And I think there is probably a knock-on effect. I like to think I'm quite a compassionate guy, and I think I am probably much more compassionate than I was a few years ago, because before I started eating this way, my compassion probably ended at the end of the human race. I didn't really care that much for animals. I value absolutely the way it's changed me, the way it's changed how I feel and my energy levels.
How much more expensive is it to eat whole foods only and avoid the cheaper alternatives?
It's cheaper. Have you ever bought meat? Meat is so expensive. Honestly, so at the start of the year, I do this thing that I like to call the Seneca diet, because Seneca said that you should just eat the cheapest food you can get your hands on just for a bit to remind yourself that even if the worst happened, you'd still be all right. So once a year, I will eat pretty much nothing but brown rice, chickpeas, onions, carrots, sweet corn. That is a very cheap way to eat. You can literally live on pounds a day that way. Look, to be fair, I spend money on on fruit more than anything else. So the only thing that I really spend a lot of money on is fancy pants fed fruit, because it tastes nice. And I kind of figure I don't have to go and spend 14 quid to buy a chicken. So I'm quite happy to buy a mango every now and again.
What's the highest protein food in your diet then? You mentioned chickpeas. Is there anything else?
Yeah, so I would say probably about a quarter of my diet is beans and pulses, and beans and pulses are relatively high in protein. If you really want to be training to bulk muscle out, which, let's face it, the vast majority of people don't, then I wouldn't worry about protein. You get enough protein by eating enough food. That's literally the only way people get protein deficiencies, is when they don't eat enough food. It's starvation. That's what causes protein deficiency. Like, seriously, just go around and ask all of your friends. Have any of them ever gone to the doctor with a protein deficiency? No, not at all. In fact, most people eat too much protein. The simple fact is that anybody eating the standard Western diet is going to be eating 2 or 3 times more protein than they actually need, and 2 or 3 times less fiber than they actually need. Look, there is a group of people who want to sell you whey. And they like to push the idea that protein is the thing to have. However, they seem to have a bigger advertising budget than the fruit and vegetable industry, because actually what you really need more of is fiber, which only comes in fruit, vegetables, whole grains, beans, and pulses. So you need to eat more of those and worry less about carbohydrates and worry less about protein, and just eat real food. That's the bottom line. Just eat stuff your grandma would recognize.
What does fibre do for the body? What does it help?
It clears out a lot of the toxins. It helps you to excrete stuff without getting too technical on it. But yeah, a lot of the junk hangs around if you haven't got enough fiber for it to bind to help it get pushed out. Also, if you eat sugar and it comes in the same package as fiber and water, your body reacts to it in a very different way to sugar, which is table sugar, which is just been broken down and is no longer bound up with any fiber, or water. All of that sugar, it comes from vegetables, doesn't it? And actually, I don't know whether anybody eats sugarcane raw. Probably they do. You eat those, they've got a lot of sugar in them, but they're not bad for you because the sugar is bound up with fiber and water. That makes a huge difference to the way your body responds to it. In fact, there's some research out there with people eating ridiculously large amounts of fruit. You were talking like over a kilo of fruit a day, and it has no effect on their blood sugar levels because it doesn't spike them because of the fiber and the water that it's bound up with.
Yeah, so is the sugar spike really the carb crash, as people call it?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of many problems with processed food. Honestly, if I was going to demonize anything, I would be more inclined to demonize meat and dairy. I think there's an awful lot of problems with those, but people generally don't want to hear that, do they?
What do you think about the red meat diet? Just like the pure red meat?
Oh, what? Just your pure Atkins, your
Liver
South
King.
Beach, all of that sort of stuff. Yeah, it's great. Atkins died in incredibly poor health, though, didn't it? You are not designed to eat loads and loads of meat. What's your closest living relative? Chimpanzees. How much meat do chimpanzees eat? Very little. They eat more insects than they do actual meat. So in terms of animal protein, eggs occasionally, but it would make up less than 5% of their diet total. So look, you're not a chimpanzee. I'm not going to push back and say you should eat absolutely no meat at all. However, if you eat nothing but meat, you will get very ill very quickly because there's no nutrition in meat. All you get from meat is calories. There's a lot of fat in meat. So you get a lot of calories, you get a lot of saturated fat, you get a lot of cholesterol. You also get a lot of dietary acid, which if you consume them in small levels, they're probably not going to be that bad for you. But if you're eating a lot of meat, then it is going to absolutely catch up with you quickly, which is why everybody I've ever met who's done Atkins feels awful. Because if a diet makes you feel awful, don't do it. Stop doing it. It is that simple. And if you want a crash weight loss diet, there are great ways of losing weight. Heroin being one of it, chemotherapy being another one. So just because you can lose weight doing it doesn't make it any good for you.
Yeah. What about fish? You mentioned you don't like meat and dairy. What about fish? Where does that?
The last thing I would ever eat would be fish. I think we really do need to leave the oceans alone now. We have systematically overfished and imbalanced those ecosystems. We've also poured an awful lot of fertilizer residue into the sea. So areas around river deltas, like the bottom of the Mississippi, you get a big dead zone there where nothing grows because of all of the fertilizer, which is coming out, all of the nitrogen, which really shouldn't be in seawater. So yeah, we've done an awful lot of damage to the oceans. So I think from an environmental point of view, you can't really argue about eating fish. From a health point of view, again, a lot of the disadvantages that you get from meat, you get from fish as well. You get the added bonus of quite high mercury levels.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, if they tell pregnant women not to eat it, don't eat it. If it's not good for a baby, don't eat it.